a whole lot of, that's why I talk about the divine feminine, because women need to get their wholeness, and they need to really claim the way sex is working for them, not a performance to please a man.
Right.
And it takes a lot of courage to do that. But it turns out, and often women will write to me and tell me the book did it on its own, that it had enough information for them to feel empowered, to feel that the way they like sex works wonderfully for them, and now they know that, you know.
Well, in reading the book, I can see that's more than just a real possibility. I think,
Yeah, and it wasn't, men's way, women's way. I'm not trying to create a dissonance between the two.
Right.
But what men really want is a woman who comes to the table with a clear idea of her own sexuality. I hear this from men so much, and they can't figure it out. They're not in a woman's body, you know.
We have no real idea at all.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm using heterosexual examples, but the truth is the same model works for same-sex couples just as well. I work a lot with same-sex couples, so
I'm sure it would. Yeah.
Forgive me for using the male-female examples, but that's the easiest way to talk. And
right.
So self-esteem is at the base of an awful lot of our mental health issues, and I believe sexuality is one of our biggest wounded places. And this culture, particularly in America, is hugely wounded because of Puritan values, because unfortunately it's been made into this precious gem that women should never do, and then suddenly get turned on. Now you're married, and I see so many cases of women that felt terrible about any sexual exploration as in their maiden years, got married, and now they're supposed to enjoy it, and they just can't get there. And so this whole lie about you save sex for marriage, and all of it is just so based on a premise about purity and about, it makes me sad. It just really makes me sad.
Well, you see, this, from my viewpoint, this when you talk about self-esteem and how it affects sexuality, from my experience and what I understand is that at the root of every addict, alcoholic problem lies this low self-esteem.
Yes, but it's such a generic term that, you need to walk a mile in somebody's shoes before it is specific enough to make sense. It's a very big catch-all word.
Well, I totally agree.
Yeah.
But in the process of which leads me to believe that this problem runs a lot deeper than just our sexuality with the self-esteem part of it.
Yes, I mean, we're holistic beings, so let's face it, everything is all interconnected.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, you say that this low self-esteem is the core of depression.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, all mental health issues, with the exception of people who have brain disorders like schizophrenia and so on, that's
right.
a different issue. You mentioned that there's a lot of seekers that are tuned in to the show, and one of the things that was true in the 70s and why I chose celibacy is that the idea that you should go off and meditate on a mountain was still very strong in terms of what's spiritual, and this split between our spirituality and our baser instincts that's been going on for actually since Augustine's time, but
absolutely.
The idea that sexuality and spirituality were never separated. There's no reason to separate them. So to have a partner and to experience this ecstatic sex is as spiritual as it gets.
Well, don't you think that this problem of spiritual being separated it's like there's a saying goes around that I'm a spiritual being having a human experience.
Right.
Which is kind of it's in my estimation, is pretty misleading. The truth is I'm a spiritual human. Right. There's that combination. Right. And if I'm already spiritual, why am I so focused on being spiritual when maybe what I need to focus on is bringing my humanity to my spirituality?
Being the best human you can be and operating on the laws of attraction.
Absolutely. And that, to me, I've found it's my journey. It's about being the best human being that I can be. And when I do that, my spirituality starts to fall in place, or probably already was there.
Yeah, it's inside. It's within us. That it's not out there anywhere.
Right, exactly. And
that's why it's so wonderful to bring the body completely into that picture. It's not denying the body. See, that's a lot of the so-called major religions in the world got into this denying the body thing. And it's sad. It was somebody's idea of how to be more spiritual, and I believe, and this is going to maybe offend some people, that because men had a hard time sort of not thinking about sex, it became more possible to, reach some state if they didn't have sexual stuff to worry about. And I think it's sad because
it's very sad. It's
cutting off half your body, in my opinion.
One of the things that's going to happen to us is we're gonna run out of time long before we run out of things to talk about. I would like to have had a 2-hour show with you, Linda. It's like,
oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, and believe me, folks, if you're even thinking about spirituality and sex and bringing them together, reclaiming Goddess Sexuality, and I'll tell you what, whether you're male or female, it's a good read. I learned a lot from it. Let's talk a minute about, because I think this is a huge issue. You talk about the female's magnetic power of attraction. Mm-hmm. But before we go there, tell us about Lilith and where all this stuff really began to go wrong.
You mean where women became repressed? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, yeah, we're talking about, I think Lilith was Adam's first wife as far as Jewish mysticism was concerned.
Lilith,
Lilith, I'm sorry, right.
Argument, lots of people want it. All of those are myths. They're all
exactly
stories. But when we go back before the more recent creation stories, God was a woman.
Absolutely.
Because the power of giving birth was the most incredible power that humans had.
Right.
So who knows? I mean, I've pondered this many years, why it was such a huge backlash against women. But somewhere at the time, and there's historical records of how this all came about. Chalice and the Blade, which is a
right. I read that a long time ago.
Yeah,
right.
She compiled a lot of those historical information. But basically, these herding cultures, the sort of Attila the Hun people, came and crushed the old European cultures that were very peaceful, for the most part, and agrarian.
Right.
Where the goddess was worshipped. People, nature, the cycles of nature is what people saw and what people understood and tuned into. So these herding cultures come along with very angry sky gods as their image, and they sort of first they crushed the cultures and then they intermarried and all of that. So little by little, and there was a period of time where the goddess was still revered as the way to become legitimate, the priestess of the goddess. And then little by little, women became more and more pushed into, you're either a wife or you're a courtesan, and those are your choices. And then women were limited more and more and more, and the children were no longer considered theirs, but the father's.
And women started to be seen as chattel or property.
As chattel, exactly as chattel. In the Old Testament, they are.
Right.
And so the issue was a property became something we owned, the individual owned as opposed to communal.
Right.
And so if I'm going to pass off on my property, as the king or the whoever, I need to know that child that she bore is actually my child. Now that was a fairly complicated issue.
Right. Very.
So the whole virginity and marrying girls at 14 and displaying blood at the after the wedding night and all of those horrible traditions that went on for centuries.
Right.
Became it's like to this day they still will murder girls in certain countries for not being virgins.
Absolutely.
The family will murder them.
Yeah, absolutely.
That craziness around have to be untouched, et cetera, only came in at a time when legitimacy had to go through the male instead of the female. Up until then, we had matrilineal cultures, and there was no big, there was no such thing as a bastard.
Okay, when you say matrilineal, you're talking about the exact opposite of the patriarchal.
No, because that would be matriarchal.
Matriarchal, I mean.
Matrilineal is simply that the bloodline, the inheritance, everything comes through the mother's
Okay,
line.
I got it. All right.
And it makes sense because then there's no question about who the mother is,
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I guess we had to go through this awful time. Women were burned and vilified in every way possible and treated badly. And I'm glad to be a female at this time because we're just now coming out of a true dark age time where women are now seen as having souls who are actually being allowed to be educated. I mean, things that even 100 years ago were impossible.
Well, for some of the damage that happened in the '60s because of drugs, many other really good things came,
That's right.
Came out of that.
That's right.
So that brings us to this idea of the magnetic power of attraction with females. When I read that,